Faggella.
Hello, and welcome to the 80th episode of NEOHUMAN podcast. I'm a Bahari ethologist on Instagram and Twitter, and you can follow the show on liveandlumbo.com, iTunes, YouTube, BitChute, and at some point on Spotify. And today with me, I have Daniel Faggella. Welcome to NEOHUMAN podcast, Daniel.
Hey, glad to be here, brother.
Yeah, let's start with your background, the work you've done, the lives you've lived, and what do you mainly focus on now these days?
Yeah, so I began sort of not in the computer science space. So right now I'm the founder and head of research at a company called Emerge Artificial Intelligence Research that I founded some 3 years ago when I sold my last business. So at Emerge, our work is really mapping the return on investment of AI in the private sector. So we look at banking and financial services, we look at pharmaceutical, we look at the range of AI use cases and which of them are actually delivering value. And we provide research products and data and advisory, kind of like a Forrester or a Gartner, to big companies who want to actually see a return from artificial intelligence. We do a good deal of work in the public sector as well, mostly in defense and security, financial crime, surveillance, things along those lines. But primarily in the private sector, it's going to be financial services, life sciences. So market research is the name of the game. But you want me to get into the old school stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting to have context where the perspective of each individual comes from. I mean, I want to talk about Emerge, I want to talk about AI, but it's also interesting to know who is representing and expressing these ideas about AI.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, I'll give you, I guess, a little bit of backdrop. So I'm not exactly from a tech background at all. I'm from a 4,000 person town in Rhode Island called Wakefield, Rhode Island. You've never heard of it before, and you will from this point until you're deaf never hear of it again. It's a very small place. It's a quaint place, a beautiful place, but it's not a place I could stay given my objectives in life. So that's where I'm from, and the way that I paid for college and ultimately for Ivy League graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, where I studied cognitive science, and my focus was on skill development and skill acquisition, so the cognitive science of acquiring skills quickly. The reason I went in for that is because I was in combat sports. So the way I was paying the bills was running a martial arts gym. So I was training fighters. We had, some fitness classes, but it was mostly mixed martial arts and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've trained extensively, given seminars around the United States and even in Brazil, and won a national tournament and did a lot of competing in my day. And so that's how I was kind of paying the bills. And so I was really interested in what does it look like to improve faster from an athlete perspective, training my own fighters, training myself. And so that's what I went to graduate school for. And when I was there, this is back in 2011, I was getting tapped on the shoulder that, hey, Dan, all this human learning stuff, all this neural stuff, they're kind of doing that with computers. And this is the really early days of ImageNet, when ImageNet started becoming exciting. This is also the very early days of when they were applying natural language processing to Twitter data. There was something called Google Zeitgeist that UPenn was involved with at the time, deriving sentiment from different factors in the social media ether and kind of determining how that correlated to different cities and how weather affected different cities and the moods of people and the sicknesses of people and things along those lines. So when I got out of grad school with the psych degree, I kind of became convinced this AI stuff, looking at the near term and then also reading people like Nick Bostrom and Ben Goertzel and learning about the long term. I was lucky enough to interview Ben Goertzel and Bostrom pretty much right out of grad school. I talked to all the major players in the AGI space. I became very convinced that in both the near and the long term, this was an exceedingly important technology, and that my understanding from a conceptual level in the cognitive sciences, I should just be able to transfer that over. So I got right into really studying this stuff and talking to the leading figures there, and eventually started a company.
Very cool. I mean, you must have started with interest in the mind, getting into martial art, the kind of martial art that you got into. It's not that, hey, let's just go out and kick some ass. It's more about finding yourself, right, through that art of battle.
Yeah, there's something to be said of that. I don't personally overly spiritualize martial arts. I think some people will play it up like they'll be like, oh, yes, I'm a martial artist, and so you should presume that I am wise. I actually don't do that. I think if I am wise, it's because I've read Montaigne and Plutarch more than because I've choked men unconscious. But I've done both. And I can say that certainly part of the fascination of the mind is from beginning with martial arts and being able to see how different people learn and also see how I learned, right? To go from, in Rhode Island, there's not that many good training partners. So to win national tournaments is actually pretty difficult. And I had to figure out how to go about drilling figure out what kind of training regimens to build for myself. And it wasn't just what kind of weights to lift. In fact, I wasn't doing much of that. It was what kind of skills do I want to acquire? And so that forced me to think about, well, how does this thing upstairs actually work? And how can I learn as quickly as possible to really perform and also have my competitors do very well in tournaments too. So yeah, it was less spiritual, but it certainly was psychological in martial arts. And that's what got me to UPenn and ultimately into AI.
Yeah, in addition to a spirituality, it's also that you had choked people unconscious, but I assume that you were also choked unconscious yourself. You were placed on the other side of the equation.
Sure right? did. I mean, everybody weighs more than me. I'm a pretty small fella, so I did a lot of competitions against very, very big opponents. In fact, if you go on Google, you type in Dan Faggella versus the Giant, you'll see me in a jiu-jitsu match against a guy that weighs 80 pounds, 100 pounds more than me, who's actually a UFC fighter. His name is Pat Walsh. So this guy fought in the cage with other 220-pound men. I walk around at about $125. So, you know, definitely, I didn't beat all those guys. That was a good match. You know, fortunately beat that guy. But yeah, I certainly had my ears boxed pretty good. You can see my cauliflower ear is pretty rough. And I've certainly, you know, I'm going to have knee problems when I'm older. That's just a fact. I'm going to have shoulder problems when I'm older. That's just a fact. But right now, it doesn't keep me from doing market research and what I love. So, you know.
Yeah, it just seems that experience of humility and empathy that you create when you're on the other side of something like that is also helpful when you're working on, let's say, artificial intelligence, which is a big difference from what is being written down on paper and in academia than what it's being implemented within the society, especially the society right now today, that a lot of people are freaked out by just the name artificial intelligence, and in a lot of aspects for right reasons, right? So I'm trying to get into, and we've talked about this a lot in this podcast, that what you put on the paper, it might seem awesome and sounds great, but there's a big difference between what sounds good and sounds sensible on the paper than when it's being implemented within the society, when a lot of people have a problem even accepting the existence of such a thing that is going to compete with human intelligence and basically the concept of humanity.
Yeah, I think, you know, in the near term, there's the job and economic considerations that are real. I don't think we're going to see the wave of automation sweep across the country in the very, very near term. But I do foresee in the next 10 years, we did a very substantial poll in 2015 of AI researchers, and by a wide margin, the most significant and consistent AI risk in the next 20 years, this is 5 years ago, was the economic and job impact. So I think that seems like a reasonable fear. But I think to your point, there is the actual species dominant stuff if we look 50 years out, 100 years out, that I think is considerable as well. So yeah, you're right. I mean, AI in theory and AI in practice, it's a lot less predictable when it's off the paper.
You know, like social adoption is a big part of any kind of technology that would progress, right? So you can recommend certain things to a business and it might seem all good, a certain kind of a technology, but when the society is rejecting that kind of technology, I bring up Google Glass, for example, as an example, that it was a very practical thing, well designed and great, but people didn't like it. Some because they couldn't get it, some because they thought, oh, you're taking this, it jeopardizes my privacy and you think you're better than me and all those things, you know?
Yeah, we did a very early interview in 2012 with the head of Engadget at the time. Engadget is a big consumer tech blog, who talked about his experience of wearing Google Glass in the subway and walking his dog and things like that, and just how it wasn't really going to fit into the normal mesh of society and the public.
There was in San Francisco?
I forget where Tim is based, Tim Stevens. This is a great many years ago, but I suspect it was the Bay Area.
Yeah, because people were getting attacked. You know, there were videos taken by those, you know, people who were wearing it in bars and restaurants, and people were getting attacked just because of wearing the glass. Part of it was the argument for privacy, but the other part was that, hey, this is not even something we can't buy from the store. This has to be given to you.
Yeah. So it was like lording over people, kind of like, I've been granted this like recording, you know, intelligence layer, and you don't have it.
A certain kind of elitism that it seems like we can't get away with that. You know, genetic engineering is another field that will create this kind of elitism that, hey, if you can't afford it, not only financially, but also there's a big difference between China, let's say, and United States. And I want to talk to you about that too, because you mentioned you're talking to and you're advising private companies, but I also see on your website that you've spoken to, for example, United Nations, Harvard University. What was, you talked to United Nations, as I see, about deepfakes. Is that right?
Yeah, so we actually, United Nations, World Bank, Interpol, the OECD, I mean, we work with...
So beyond the private sector also.
Yeah, these are the most substantial intergovernmental organizations in the world who are luckily, at this point, at least allocating a certain amount of attention to artificial intelligence. And there are certainly initiatives that I really believe in there. And not all of those organizations are our clients formally. Some are. We've done substantial projects with the World Bank, for example, but some are just speaking engagements because I happen to think it's a very valuable topic that should be at UN headquarters, and we were called upon to talk about it. So deepfakes is a good example of that, where I'm pretty close with the folks that run the artificial intelligence and robotics wing of what is called UNICRI, which is the crime and justice wing of the United Nations. I really respect those guys. I think they do a great job, and they have a thorough understanding of the space. Not everybody in the intergovernmental domain does. And they had called us in to essentially create a deepfake of the head of UNICRI, so a woman by the name of Bettina, who was the director of that wing of the United Nations. So we took a video of her, and then we made her say a bunch of things she never said, and then also extrapolated that into how almost anything can be programmatically generated and how much better and better that programmatic generation is becoming and what some of the considerations might be. My personal focus is on the long term of that. Yes, political influence, I think, is something. Media and truth is something. I think the actual leap in the human experience when we can push a button and have what we wish before our eyes, the conjuring of what we wish before our eyes, I think is a much grander transition than is spoken about in the purely political space. So I tried to create that stretch for UN leadership there.
So democratization of information is the big picture, is what you're talking about, because it's not only deep fakes, but also, let's say, 3D printing, that now we have to deal with the very reality that within a couple of years, some parts of a gun can be very viably printed inside of someone's bedroom, and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Yeah, I'm, my personal expertise is not in 3D printing. I mean, we've done a couple bits of coverage on the intersection of what is called additive manufacturing, sort of the broad umbrella of 3D printing, and AI, so where those two mesh. But making projections around that tech, I have much less confidence than I do in, let's say, artificial intelligence in almost any industry. But yeah, to your point, I mean, that's part of the transition. I think what I'm articulating explicitly here is a broader dynamic of a kind of going in. So where the majority, the bulk of our experience transitions into virtual spaces. So you and I are kind of doing that right now. I do that on my phone a good deal. We're all on a screen a really good percentage of the time. And if you look at like human life and human life on screen time as a graph here, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. And I think that when we can call forth the kinds of experiences we want, whether it's a relaxing background to do our work, whether it's a movie that's created just for us, right? I want to learn about the French Revolution, but I want to learn about it through the eyes of Saint Just. And I don't really care that much about the post-revolutionary Bonaparte stuff. I just want to go right up until Saint Just's death. That's it. And I want to look through his eyes. When a movie can be played per my preferences and creation and based on my past learning and based on my current responsiveness, right? Am I attentive or is it boring me? Being able to have that generated in real time, I think that might be 15 years off. But I think that we get to a point where the compellingness of virtual ecosystems will be so amazing in terms of fulfilling drives for curiosity, creativity, for love, eventually with haptics. That might involve sex. Lord knows how that's going to evolve. That's not exactly my focus area, but I do think there's going to be transitions there too. And I think that as the body becomes a husk, and as most of what we wish in its highest form, right now, if you ask me, Dan, what is the most refreshing, rewarding, lovely thing that you could do, I would tell you it is walking in nature, reading actual papyrus and a really, really good book. Like not Kindle. I mean, like paper. I don't have ancient texts in my house, but I like. I'm not. Even if I was.
Yeah, I was going to ask. You can read papyrus.
even if I was exorbitantly wealthy, I would not become such a profligate in my collecting of of text like that. But you know, I like me a good old book, and I like to breathe in, you know, the pine, and I like to, you know, see the sunset and those sorts of things, right? But I am not above the idea that within 15 years, a programmatically generated permutation of that, even the wind through my hair in a programmatically generated sense, might be astronomically more refreshing because it would be hyper calibrated to all the very best experiences of that in the past. And that is, in fact, the transition I'm talking about. I wrote an article called Lotus Eaters and World Eaters. So Lotus Eaters and World Eaters. If Googled, that article would come up. And this is about the bigger transition. So for me, I think democratization of information is a very big part of it. I think that going in is the dynamic that I consider to be astronomically disruptive. And I think essentially borderline no one is talking about.
So that's very interesting because recently we've been talking about when people are talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and I like personally to think of that A as augmented intelligence as well, that you don't really have to reverse engineer and rebuild the entire brain or an intelligence. You can use it as a mesh net basically, or an exoskeleton, right?
Yep.
But the argument that I'm hearing is that AI is focused on the thinking mind, on the analytical mind, on the left brain basically. The right brain and instincts and things we cannot really describe by words, that is something that we can't even begin to understand ourselves, let alone trying to replicate that with any kind of a machine intelligence. But that is a huge part of what you're talking about, to merging basically within blurring this line of what is real and what is not real further and further in the coming years.
Yeah, and I would say, so I may not describe it similarly. I think it's an interesting distinction, the left and right brain. I would say that certainly at like an emotive level, I don't think we're able to replicate, to the best of our knowledge, we're not able to replicate sentience in AI, although we did do a pretty extensive poll of artificial intelligence researchers around when sentience might be possible, something like 2060. Who knows if they're right? Nobody knows if anybody's right. But I'm curious about the topic. Consciousness, I think, is a morally worthy thing. It might be the morally worthy thing, but that's its own conversational thread. But right and left brain, I think, it's tough to say where AI actually sits because, for example, you know, if we look at the programmatically generated stuff in the future, right? Let's say 10 years from now, if you are a designer of logos, like company logos, you will not like just take 15 hours to craft one really good logo and then take another 15 hours to craft another really good logo. You may begin with simply a verbalized or set of checkboxes, set of configurable features. You know, like what are the values we want to convey? What are the values we stand for as a company? You know, what kind of color palettes are we thinking might be good, whatever, and have a programmatically generated plethora of logos that are already stacked and ranked based on what we would presume humans would respond to most favorably based on the values that we had set before. Now, we would need a really big data set of people looking at different logos and correlating them with values, and we're not there yet. But if nothing else, we could start with a plethora, and we could take individual permutations, determine some tweaks, determine some adjustments, and create another plethora off of that one permutation. And in so doing, generate just generally better and more ideas, better and more ideas. Same with architecture, same with fashion, same with textiles, same with name your damn creative domain. Creating beats. You want to create Muzak for the elevator? You want to create rap music? I mean, being able to just have programmatically generated beats that we know are going to hit, that we know are going to respond, that people are going to respond well to. We might train it off of Spotify data in terms of what's most popular right now. We might train it off of whatever we want to do. This sort of extension of what you might refer to as the left brain will eventually become the norm in a great many creative fields. Now, is that going to be 10 years? Is that going to be 15 years? I can't exactly tell you, but I will say there was a time where as a graphic designer, you didn't need to know how to use a computer. And let me tell you, my good man, times have changed. And let me tell you, my good man, in 15 years, times will change again. And this kind of technology will be part of that change.
I think a good point of distinction you mentioned with music, for example. What constitutes better is the context that already exists, right? That is determined based on us, humans.
Yes.
We are very limited in our experience. It's linear. And the argument can be made that for AI to reach its true potential, it should not rely on humanity whatsoever. So after that point, the argument would become, would the AI, artificial intelligence, be able to create a beat or a piece of music that has absolutely no root within the context that is created by human civilization, and is something that is introducing a new context altogether? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I don't know if you wanted to go this far down the rabbit hole, but there isn't a depth that you could go that I will not follow you.
Oh, so, amazing. I'm mostly interested in rabbit holes, because academic sides, I'm like, everything is written on Google. There are so many people who can nail those things better, but I think it's very important to be imaginative and consider many different options that we have to deal with in the coming years.
I think these are interesting topics. Again, they aren't things that I'd be called upon to speak about at Interpol or at Citibank, but they are the long ball consequences that I think, as you pointed out, it's important to kind of splay those open and see what does this mean? Where does this go? To your point about music, I think the question here would be, what would be the purpose of music? If the purpose is enjoyment, and we are the only sentient things that enjoys, then I suspect you're right. We may be able to start from scratch and create beats and permutations of sound that really don't resemble any known musical genre. That might be extremely appealing to some people, right? Very rare that music would be appealing to everybody, but that might be doable. Now, if AI itself could become sentient in some sense, maybe it would create. If artificial general intelligence were to create art for itself, two things. A, it's extremely unlikely we would be able to understand it. And B, it's extremely unlikely it would have a form that we now recognize. It's not going to be carving marble. It's not going to be frickin' oil paints, right? It's going to be something astronomically more complicated. Yeah. And from the viewpoint of something astronomically more intelligent, it'll be astronomically more beautiful, right? The language of such an entity, we might think about it like you and I have an alphabet. We're speaking English right now. You may speak other languages. I don't. I pretend to have a fistful of French words, but I go no farther. I'm an uncultured American. History, I'm pretty strong, but languages. So let's presume we're talking about the English alphabet. We got a couple dozen letters to work with here, and we can only talk at this current bandwidth. An AGI might have a number of symbols that it might communicate with either itself or other AGIs that we might imagine a cube of like 1 million pixels this way and 1 million pixels this way and 1 million pixels this way, and each of those pixels can have 1 of 2 trillion different permutations of what we want to call it, like color, number, what have you. And that any combination of all of that pushed through is like a letter. And so like we couldn't possibly imagine the full extent of what expression would be for something beyond us, no better than a caterpillar could imagine our expression, could imagine Shakespeare's sonnets, could imagine, great architecture, Corinthian columns. Caterpillars ain't going to cut that mustard, and we ain't going to cut the mustard of what's beyond us either.
Yeah, we are creating a new and different kind of a species than humanity. And I think this is very important for people to understand, that this is not a phase or a trend that's just going to go away. And in 10 years, people will be in charge of everything again. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do operate under that assumption.
Yeah.
I think it is really seen as a very short-term transition.
Is it also shared within governments and UN and those places that you talk at?
Yeah, I mean, in the broad sweep, so my unabashed long-term objective here is to bring what I refer to as the trajectory of intelligence conversation into these organizations of which I have a relationship with. However, I'm not here to impose that when it's not a time that they're interested about it, right? I have certain people within these orgs that I can talk about all manner of topics. But for many, it's the reason I'm called on is because we study what's possible and what's working. So they're going to have an academic. They might have, an expert in computer vision, but they need somebody who's going to say, well, here's where it's impacting this industry. Here's where it's impacting industry. Here's what makes it hard to adopt. Here's what makes it easy to adopt in defense. Here's what, they need a reality check on where it's impacting the world. And that's why I step into the World Bank, to Interpol, et cetera. So I'm not going to force feed them that stuff, but it is my unabashed goal to eventually be able to introduce these themes. And we have a new series we have a podcast called the AI and Business Podcast, and we have a Saturday series called AI Futures, where we're kind of stretching this. We're taking people from reputable organizations, like, let's say, Berkeley. Stuart Russell was our first guest on this podcast. The OECD, folks from the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, and we're having them kind of stretch the credible viewpoints into where is this ultimately taking us? Because for me, I think we do need to consider those things. But to your point, right now in government and in business, it is absolutely not on the radar. It's not even fiction. It's literally not on the table in any way. It's not even digestible. It's almost invisible. Even if it were to be articulated, it would not even land on the table. It doesn't exist.
And it's shared in politics. I mean, you see how important AI is, and nobody's really talking about it.
Nobody's talking about the long term. No.
Even short term, you see, like, neither Trump or Biden are really talking about AI, but AI is going to have huge impacts on every single human being's lives on this planet.
And I think, so what is it to be a politician?
Just winning a popularity contest.
In Emerson's words, to eat dust before the men who actually stand behind the throne, something akin to this. Now, I don't know, I'm not disparaging politicians, not even in the slightest. In fact, I do respect the profession despite the gritty realities therein. But to be a politician, like you said, yes, popularity contest. So why aren't they talking about AI? Well, it just doesn't matter enough to the constituents, right? Yeah. Why are they talking about, name your topic, sir? Name your topic. I mean, the most arbitrary things become giant friction points, and then they get in all the speeches. Is it because of their inherent meaning and some platonic reality? No. It's simply because they resonate with the constituency. So we can expect AI to land on the sort of political speech table when it matters to the people who are being spoken to.
Yeah, the disruption of AI and technology basically are not in any shape or form determined by the political will or social will to accept them, though. That's the thing. Like, you're talking about deep fakes. Deep fakes will come and disrupt future political campaigns and the perspective of constituents and the politicians and all of them all together, without, you know, anybody agreeing or disagreeing with them. It does not require agreement of people to go in that certain kind of a speed that technology is evolving, right? So it's important to at least acknowledge the huge disruption that we haven't seen anything of it yet, you know, because what we are experiencing right now, this seemingly division that exists globally, really, a lot of people can say that this is because people finally have channels of expressions in the form of social media that now they can be heard.
When you say division, by the way, I just want to follow you. What do you mean? So
division, for example, what is being portrayed by the media and what is being portrayed by certain news media.
Division right and left, division upper and lower class. I mean, what is the core division? Political
division. Yeah, because the class division, nobody really wants to talk about.
I don't know enough about the class division to have a firm opinion on that. But okay, so you're talking about the more or less the left and right to some degree.
Right. Like this recent example of the video of George Floyd getting killed by the police, which is horrible, and it started a lot of consequences as a result of it. But in a couple of years, a fake video can come up of a very same kind of a thing that half of the audience and half of the viewers will believe it right off the bat. Well, this is going to have very real consequences socially and politically.
Yeah, you know, this really is on my mind a lot. So, I mean, again, UN, I've been on, I was in television in Singapore on this same topic. What does this mean for the future? And also with reference to this political division, I've thought a lot about it. And on some level, I didn't see it coming as fast as it was. So I was at Facebook headquarters in 2016.
You're talking about deep fakes.
No, I wasn't talking about deepfakes, but I was at Facebook headquarters in 2016 talking to the head of core machine learning at the time, a fellow by the name of Hussein Mahena, very sharp fellow. I think he's with Google now. They always swap around over there. There's only so many places to go in SF. But a really sharp fellow. And I recall only very lightly talking about what was beginning to rattle. This is before Trump was elected. What was beginning to rattle is this idea of echo chambers. for political perspectives. And I thought to myself, I'm not seeing that much of it just yet right now in my own experience. I don't really see that as like the real workhorse of, friction in society. But by golly, 4 years later, I can tell you that the echo chamber thing, it's not just, well, more people have a voice and that's why they're fighting each other. I would actually push back on that idea very firmly. I would push back on that idea. I suspect that there are mounted incentives and money to be made and influence to be wielded that sort of make incessant division just work, right? I mean, who has a Twitter following more than 100,000 people who isn't primarily basing it on a for or against or an affinity, right? Oh, I run a puppy kennel or something, or I like take pictures on the beach and I'm an attractive woman. Like, sort them out. Intellectuals. You're going to pop off if you can have a strong enemy, right? Because you've already got a huge resonance. If you're kind of middle of the road, it's like you're the enemy of both, man. And I think that what I like about Boston is it's actually okay to be middle of the road. I'm tied to neither political party. You can do that and not be a bad guy. In San Francisco, I mean, you're essentially a Bible thumper. Now, I've never read the Bible, but oddly enough, I'm close to being one in the Bay Area. And you with that American flag I would not recommend. So you doing that within 20 miles of San Francisco, I would not recommend it.
And, I was a refugee in Canada and I'm an ex-Muslim immigrant in the U.S.
And I'm glad to have you. I'm glad as hell.
All it takes is one quote unquote wrong interpretation of the U.S. flag, for example, which I had in my room in Tehran. United States is a beacon of light still for people all around the world. You see protesters in Hong Kong under that kind of a situation. They're waving the American flags. It has a meaning beyond politics and geography.
Yeah, I hope it retains that meaning. That's my hope.
I agree.
I'm not here calling America good ubiquitously, right? I'm obviously not doing that. But I am saying that it's a shame when it's ubiquitously seen as evil, because I think we actually have a lot more in common that hopefully we can get along with. But technology is certainly veering us away from having concord here.
Yeah, it also shows deeper parts of human nature, right? Like what you were saying, that people depend on division in order to capitalize on it. This is something that is very deeply woven within who we are. Oh,
yes. Oh, yes. The tribe, sir, the tribe.
Yeah.
I mean, we are a tribal species, and us versus them is the automatic frame. It takes vigilant, volitional effort to do anything other than think us versus them in almost all circumstances. I mean, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but to be frank, it's quite clearly the norm. Anyone who considers themselves free entirely of that dynamic, I think, is generally fooling themselves to a spooky degree. I think we should be aware of just how consistent and vigilant we have to be, and that we're never going to be perfect in that category. But I hope we can work at it. I don't think we're doing a great job right now as a country.
As a country, yeah, especially with China on the other side of the equation.
Yeah, all right. You want to? Well,
yeah, let's get
you open that can of
let's
worms
get in there. I remember talking to someone in Toronto a couple of years ago at a Toronto transhumanist meetup, and we talked for like 3 hours.
It's awesome.
And at the end, I was like, there really only 3 things matter in this world: China, United States, and what they do with artificial intelligence. And this is a couple of years ago, and it seems to be the case.
My friends in Paris would be angry if I agreed with you, so I'm going to pretend to disagree with you.
Please expand on that.
I would take a lot of flack. No, I mean, what for you is interesting about the U.S.-China AI race? I mean, I think about this incessantly, and I think about this from a defense perspective. I think about this from a media perspective. I spoke in Shanghai for the United Nations. I've interviewed a tremendous number of companies with co-founders in China that are in the AI space, as well as investors in the Asian AI ecosystem. And so I have vantage points that have fleshed this out pretty reasonably thoroughly. I mean, I'm not an expert in its entirety, but what makes it interesting for you? What's important about that dynamic?
What's interesting to me is within the context of human nature, the tribalism that we talked about and how we have always used technology as a tool in order to pursue our human intentions. And the biggest tribes right now I see in the world is the Chinese Communist Party and the United States government, that they're clearly in conflict with each other, which creates, competition is always good to develop new things. It creates like space race and, a lot of our technology is contribution of the wars that we have fought, right? But at the end of the day, it's very important to understand that AI is perhaps the ultimate tool, an ultimate, depending on the intention, can be used as a weapon, can be used as it's like any other tool. With fire, you can warm yourself up or burn down your entire building. And it's very interesting to me because I know China has access to more data than United States, and US is kind of, now please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like US is lagging behind China specifically because of the decentralized system that the US has versus a centrally driven group of engineers in China that were like, this is our objective, we're going to get it no matter how. And in the United States, you have to, argue about the definition of the word, for example, is for many months, costing millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, and I mean, the communist system, never having worked within it or understanding it to a great extent, I'm sure has its own hiccups and what we might refer to as inefficiencies with corruption and, however that operates. But to your point, so I wrote a rather in-depth article called The 7 Weaknesses of the West. So if someone typed emerge, E-M-E-R-J, 7 Weaknesses of the West, they'd find it on Google. And this really summarizes a lot of what I consider to be where we're behind the 8 ball with China. Now, the United States, I did another very lengthy piece on the AI in China ecosystem, how it's developing, how it's evolving, the kinds of startups, et cetera. That's its own bit of research that I believe is free as well. But we have more academic muscle. We have more actual scientists and actual scientists who have experience deploying it, which is a really, really good distinction. Because coming out of Carnegie Mellon is kind of neat, like you're not dumb. That's awesome. That's great. But actually having experience, turning that into a user experience, or reducing money laundering in a bank, or improving retention for a subscription service, that's a much more robust, practical, applicable experience. And that's frankly not something you can get in purely academia. So we have certainly some edges here. And I think some people are optimistic that the free market system will also just be more creative writ large. That said, there are a lot of disadvantages. And a lot of them, I think, have to do with, well, you mentioned centralization. I think a lot of this ties to the ability for the Chinese Communist Party to marshal a united front of effort. And that involves many factors here. That involves the private sector and academia essentially just being wings of the great and ruling power. So being nothing more but wings, nothing more. That's a very powerful and lovely place to be. Yeah. And in fact, I mean, Confucius, there's no better setup. So Xi Jinping, if your objective was to rule without question, Xi Jinping would be, I mean, I think he's in a great spot. I mean, if that was your goal, right? I'm just saying if it was your goal, he's in the best spot.
Objectively speaking. There is no,
Pericles is not revered in China, right? The Socrates and Christ of China would be Confucius, almost unquestionably. And man, I mean, Confucius is real congenial to, everything lining up to the great emperor, Yeah. Now, I'm not saying Confucius advocates for tyranny. In fact, I think it's pretty clear he doesn't. But it can be bent and molded so sweetly, so snugly, in a nice, obedient alignment. And I think so culturally, he sits in just an absolutely beautiful, almost impeccable cultural soil for what he is to do. And they have the wings of the party dynamic going on. I think they also have the ruler for life thing, right? Yeah. Mao, ruler for life. I mean, the man, they don't fall from their position until the mandate of heaven takes them off of it, right? This is like BC. We're talking BC here, these precedents. This is a culture that is, I mean, rich, in my opinion, rich and amazing to no end. I mean, the Tang Dynasty, I mean, I'm so fascinated with the history of China. I'm not a big CCP fan, but China, I'm just like ravenously interested across the board. But many of these precedents are very early, and now they're wielding them and they're leveraging them in a way that really makes a lot of sense. And so Xi can think about a 20-year goal. Trump has got to get elected.
Yeah.
He's got to get elected, and whoever's after him has got to get elected. For Xi, it's kind of like, he can set a 2040 goal, and he can genuinely take a hard swing at that. Right? Deng Xiaoping was up there for Lord knows how long. What was he, 90 or something when he stepped down? So these guys can take a really good run at it, and that ability to think long term, I think, puts us at a sincere disadvantage. And
so do you see, this is actually a very interesting point. Do you see the representative democracy as a system is a system worthy of being disrupted, considering that your competitor is being driven on a centrally driven kind of a system? Which I also want to add, this was something brought up in Joe Rogan podcast, as someone mentioned, I keep bringing this up, that China is run by engineers, the United States is run by lawyers. So there's a very big difference in not only implementing solutions, but also recognizing problems and solutions to, be the most practical kind of solutions. And we seem to be stuck in this representative democracy and all the consequences of it.
That question, I would say this is an apt time to ask that question. I would also say it is beyond my pale to have firm and square opinions about the how of the reconstruction. Again, it's not my domain. I'll speak to things that I feel confident about and not so much ones I don't. But I do believe, I have reason to believe from my vantage point and my own experience and where I feel like I have expertise that's worthwhile to talk about, that it's warranted to question it. Because some of these points, so the whole point of that 7 Weaknesses of the West article, and I have some other pieces coming out about China in the coming 3 or 4 months, particularly around media. That is to say, our media is essentially built to divide us, and China gets free reign to come in however they want. Buy up the movie theaters, buy up the movie studios, buy up the, we're all using TikTok, right? Mm-hmm. And what are they using? Google and Facebook? Nay, my comrade. Nay, my comrade. So they get to mold this, what they would refer to as harmony. We might refer to, as something more akin to obedience, right. Something more akin to like break your legs if you do the wrong kind of yoga in the park, Falun Gong. But they would call it harmony. But they were able to consciously mold that through the entirety of their digital ecosystems, and we're not a part of it. They can buy the movie theaters out, brother. They can buy the people who make the films out, brother. They can buy up the big gaming companies. You see Blizzard. You're not allowed to talk about Uyghurs on Blizzard, right? Yep. So media is its own ball of wax. But yeah, I would say, given those present dynamics, there's someone I follow on Twitter whose name now completely evades me, but who framed it very well, better than I had previously, is that there's a default momentum where we would then just follow and keep up with China in terms of control in media, in order to make sure that we're not weaker than them. Yeah. That might be a natural momentum, which is dangerous, right? To be a follower and to also follow of anybody. Mao. I mean, if you're going to give me one person to follow, I will give you 1 million human beings before I give you Mao. I will give you literally 1 million men. 1 million men or women. Like I'll give you Thatcher. I'll give you, name them. I'll give you Joan of Arc. I mean, I don't care, anybody but Mao. So I think that the default momentum is in that direction, and we do have to think about what does it look like to maintain our strengths and our values, while also dealing with the reality of the digital ecosystem that we exist in. And one of my big contentions with defense is that I think a tremendous amount of money goes into things that rust, that is to say tanks, et cetera, while China, I think intelligently, is playing the economic and playing the digital and media game, which is much more plausibly deniable. And I think in the future will be a much bigger lever of influence. And so I think that they're playing smarter than we are in that domain.
Very well said. Do you think it's corruption that takes more money towards the rustable things that you're talking about? Like they have lobbyists and contractors and connections with certain manufacturers.
I don't know enough about what is called the military industrial complex, right? I don't know it. In fact, I don't know enough to even have a firm opinion on that phrase. So I've spoken with folks in defense writ large. I consider them to be good folks, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was all manner of, dealings and whatnot that might be less than ideal and might be kind of tainted incentives in many different regards. But I can't speak to it enough. I don't have enough experience.
Is DARPA still the leading, I guess we can call them agency or department or whatever with respect to artificial intelligence?
Yeah, they have so many different branches now, and I think what I am heartened by is that there are more of these efforts to improve public-private sector partnership, really, really direct efforts. We did a very robust report about all of the published AI strategy docs from the U.S. public sector, so the AI.gov and all the permutations that are publicly available. What do they have in common? What are the common initiatives? A critical thrust across absolutely all of them is improving public-private sector partnerships. And we see new organizations, like it used to be called the DIUX, now it's called the DIU. It's sort of another sort of investment venture wing. We have things like In-Q-Tel and DARPA that have been around forever. DARPA is obviously still a huge deal. But we also have similar little, what we could call sort of like accelerator incubators / venture arms of even the Air Force has their own shtick. They have a little camp that they run in Boston and a place that they rent out, and I think they make investments and work with tech talent and whatnot. So there's a spidering proliferation of these groups. I don't know enough about their coordination to say if I feel good about that. My inkling is it's not amazing because defense is very complicated. But yeah, DARPA is still, I would say, the best known to the best of my knowledge. But luckily it's proliferating.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Based on the data and understanding that you have gathered within these years, you must have some kind of end game kind of a picture for US AI supremacy and Chinese AI supremacy. Do you have something like that?
I do. I've written an article on it. So
what are some of the drastic contrasts between those kind of words? The word where AI is driven by a US supremacy, or the world that AI is driven by Chinese supremacy?
Yeah, I try my hardest to not think about that as my default frame. It's very hard not to because of the whole Thucydides trap and because of so the level of tension that we're dealing with right now. But I in my heart of hearts, as a first swing, I have an article called "We Unite or We Fight," so EMERJ, we unite or we fight, which is really around getting on the same page. It's a horrible word, but same-pagedness, we could call it solidarity, around what kind of 10-year, 20-year, even maybe longer, visions we want for a global society, and being able to somewhere agree on that to align and have transparency and steering, shared transparency and steering around where the big trajectory actually goes. That said, I'm not necessarily an optimist that a same-pagedness between China as it stands today and the U.S. Is really all that possible. If China had the government of Japan, for example, I probably really wouldn't be all that.
No, of course not. Yeah,
democratic nation. I mean, I just don't really think there's going to be that many problems with that. I mean, Japan's a different ballgame than us, but democracy-wise, and people are people. There's no issues with individual Chinese folks by any means. But yeah, I feel as though the kind of global solidarity and alignment that would be required to get on the same page about what are we to turn into, what is the human experience to be, what is the global community to bloom into beyond the present human experience, because we're not really going to be able to stop that train. Yeah. Hopefully we can guide it. Hopefully it can be something other than war that drives it forward. So that article articulates what my hoped vision would be, which is not war, which is solidarity. But I'll tell you, to get to that solidarity, there's got to be a smarter guy than me for that one.
Because sometimes just parts come from different kind of experience and background. It's been true with certain religions that some religions, they just do not want to get along with other religions or other competitors. They demand submission. That's what they're demanding. However, we fool ourselves in this part of the world, that doesn't change their status quo and default state. So it seems like there is a fundamental disconnect between the Chinese Communist Party, and I'm not dividing based on good and bad or any kind of ethical or moral judgment, but they're just coming from a very different kind of a place and looking for a very different kind of an outcome than the United States.
I think that is certainly the case. What I will say about the United States, as absolutely horrible as I think we're doing right now on the global stage, from Trump to you name it. I mean, it just as just brutal as our perception is globally. Our value prop is, it ain't that bad. It ain't that bad, man. I mean, there's a lot of countries that dig our value prop more than whatever they were rocking with before they had it. And now, am I advocating for colonial? Not even freaking close, right? But somebody would misinterpret that because that's the world we live in right now. What I will say is that just as a culture, the general value prop I think is really strong. It's very hard for China to. So I believe there's a permutation of a Machiavelli quote, something akin to, and this might be bastardized, and I apologize, but something akin to, when you take over a country or a county or what have you, you have the choice to let them keep their arms or to take away their arms. But you can't let them keep their arms and then later take away their arms. Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to China selling their value proposition to other countries, those countries would have to be at brutal war with each other for a very long time and essentially lose all semblance of a stable democracy before you would say yay to the kind of vulgar tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think that the sale of their shtick is a tougher sell. And so if we have nothing else going for us in the States, it would be that you can tweet what you want, including about the man who purportedly runs the country, and you're going to go to bed just fine.
Yeah, the fundamental American values. There, I say constitutional values. Absolutely.
Dare you say? Yeah. You're a Bible thumper, aren't you?
Must be, and a white supremacist, I guess.
Anyway, but yes, I mean, I just think about them as, in the OECD, I have a really warm and abiding respect for the OECD as an organization. I really recommend people interested in solidarity, certainly in sort of the broad Western dynamic versus the hardcore communism, to learn more about the OECD. But they refer to it as like-minded nations, right? It's not any one person's constitution. It's just, can you say what you want and nobody breaks your legs? Yeah. Can you pray to what you want and nobody breaks your legs? Can you come together and congregate how you want and nobody breaks your legs? It's just basic stuff. It's just basic stuff. So for me, it's not even constitutional. It's just like-minded nations where somewhat essential sort of freedoms, as far back as Greece, or we want to tie to John Locke, or I don't really care who gets the credit, just the kinds of freedoms that we enjoy, right? So I can extrapolate it even beyond the Constitution if we wanted to.
Yeah, interesting. Transparency is the key. Definitely. Are you at all confident and optimistic about decentralization on the basis of blockchain to reach some of these goals?
I don't know enough about blockchain to have a square opinion there. What I will tell you is this: there appears to be very little blockchain tinkering its way into the actual enterprise right now. Now, the same could be said of AI, but AI is much farther along in, let's say, big banks, big media companies, e-commerce, manufacturing. Artificial intelligence is eking its way in the corners. I'm not saying it's easy and a fun time, but it's making a difference. It's clearly going to be transformative. Blockchain, I don't think the use cases are so nascent that I really don't have firm opinions. When I look at the intersection of blockchain and AI, which I have done some research on, it's nascent to the point where I literally don't care about it yet.
I mean, didn't you talk about that with Ben Goertzel? Because Ben Goertzel's Singularity Net is...
And I have a tremendous respect for Goertzel, by the way. I mean, I consider Goertzel, in my personal opinion, he's one of probably 4 living intellectuals who I would say have really influenced my thought, and who I consider to be, toweringly intelligent. So I've a great respect for Goertzel. But yeah, I mean, and I hope his firm succeeds. I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for Singularity Net. It still seems to me to be a great many different ideas that they're exploring in terms of what the business model will be and how it's going to work out. And you know, if anybody can do it, hopefully it's him. But
Yeah,
I think
what can lead to AGI? That's the thing, because we don't really know what can lead to AGI at this point.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we don't have a clue yet. So Ben's got some theories though, and you know, he's got more informed theories than me. He's been thinking about it since
fascinating individual. Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about having an hour-long conversation, so I don't want to leak.
Yeah, I do have a 2 o'clock, unfortunately. But
okay.
I'm having a blast with you. It's been a real fun
Yeah,
time.
man. Dan's website is emerge.com. Go there and find all the other information. Let me ask you the last question I ask all my guests. That if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done? And what would you say is our greatest achievement?
Good gracious, brother. I have no idea. What is the worst thing we've done? Well, I mean, tribal and religious wars seem pretty rough. That's a very big umbrella. I apologize for the vagary there. And in terms of the best things that we've done, I think it's determine ways to both govern ourselves and progress forward in terms of our potential at the same time with reasonable periods of peace. I think that's it's a laudable achievement for hairless apes like ourselves, and I think we can deserve a pat on the back for that one.